Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Onfido's webinar on the 5 identity fraud predictions of 2020. My name is Simon Halswell. I'm accompanied by my colleague on our document specialist team, Dimi Radu. We will be holding maybe some questions towards the end of the seminar, so do feel free to send those in. But I suppose we will just crack on with the presentation. Dimi, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Good evening and good morning, and hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar.
Okay, so the first topic that we were going to look at was one of our first predictions is, well, the increasing problem with data breaches. Data breaches have hit the press quite a lot over recent years. These are not going to go away. These are not going to get any smaller or any easier to deal with. PII will just continue to get cheaper and cheaper. If we look at some statistics, we can see we've got over 3,800 reported data breaches. These are ones that have been publicly disclosed, and we can only assume that there are a greater number that have not been disclosed. With records that have been compromised going over 4 billion. We can see the sort of the increase in number of breaches is now 54% increase on last year, and the official price for PII data on an individual is around $5, although I believe you can probably haggle that down a little bit as well. Yeah, so we've seen that these will continue to increase in the future. It's just getting cheaper. Got some other interesting stats on that, Dimi?
Yeah, of course. Interestingly, the reason why this is a problem, especially in the KYC and financial industries, is because many people rely solely on database searches to perform identity verification, which means once those details are in the public, the KYC is effectively useless because that information is already known to the public. We have a very interesting example that happened during the month of June in Bulgaria. Quite small country in Eastern Europe, has a population of roughly 7 million, of which 5 million citizen records have been leaked online. Now, that is almost 100% of the adult population of a country has had their date of birth, names, addresses, and tax codes leaked online. So if you're relying on identity searches using a database, naturally some areas are more dangerous than others, and that's just one case. However, there are many others, as I'm sure that many of the attendees will have heard in the media recently. I'm thinking about the Adobe hack, yep, which happened not very long ago. I think it's about a month and a half ago. 7 million email addresses leaked, together with information about the users of Adobe Cloud. And there's an even greater one. Yeah, with the, was it from Capital One, something like 100 million credit card applications and accounts were breached. Yeah. With all this kind of information flying around, yeah, it's very dangerous. I mean, we see this kind of thing as well in our line of work, where we're seeing fakes that are being created based upon this PII data that's retrievable, and it can be anything from just your details, your personal details, your biometrics, but also maybe even images of your documents. Exactly, and we've heard actually the Marriott hack that happened, where a lot of people that had accounts with one of the big hotel branches, they were their identity documents were included as part of those accounts. So the documents assigned to those people were also in the clear. And once it's out in the open, it's very simple to just repurpose those, create false applications using that data. It's not too hard to just jump on the internet, pull someone's photographs from Google, from like a LinkedIn account or from a Facebook account, something that's very easy and open to the public. And there you go, you've got your document that you've got from a data breach, you've got an image that you've got and sourced just from easy access to the internet. Yeah, and this actually leads us nicely into the second prediction that we have for next year, and this is regarding SIM swaps. So what is SIM swap? Well, actually, SIM swap is a form of account takeover. Many of us use two-factor authentication to log into a system, and many of the secure and enterprise system actually require second factor authentication, which could be either an email or an SMS. Now, SIM swap is a form of fraud where a bad actor takes control of the phone number assigned to a given individual. Then any passwords or SMSs sent to the new phone number will be actually sent to the fraudster. So that means that they can now take over any account associated with that phone number. So between the data breaches, where you can find someone's email, and the SIM swaps, that actually creates a perfect avenue for fraudsters to target high net worth individuals and defraud them. And I'm sure you will have heard about some of the cases happening recently. There was the case of Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, who had his Twitter account hacked. Surprise, surprise. And also some other cases with investors losing millions of dollars exactly through this one technique.
Yeah, well, the Wall Street Journal story that we've highlighted here, was it Michael Tilder or something or Tedron, I think his name was. This is a guy who lost the equivalent of 24 million US dollars that he had in cryptocurrency. And the first thing he knew about it was he was sitting there and suddenly his mobile phone lost signal. And that was because they had just performed a switch. They'd already hacked his phone once. So they'd already managed to do this before, but it hadn't come to anything. And he'd been made aware of this breach. He'd then gone back to his mobile phone provider. He'd gone and got extra security access. He got them to issue him with a new SIM card, new telephone numbers, everything. But they simply did it again. I think he believes that maybe there was someone at the telephone provider who's sold his data, because that's one of the idea is either it's being hacked or there's corruption of someone who works within the phone provider who's giving out these details. And once you've actually got access to someone's telephone number, what they did in this case was they just hit up his Google account, because with Google, you've got the forgotten password set up. And what that will do is it will use your two forms of identification, of authentication. They'll contact you via text message to confirm that you do want to change your password. Once they've done that, they lock you out of your own Google account. They've then got access to all of your Gmail. And as we all know, your emails are where you get confirmations of all your logins for everything else. So if you're not deleting those emails, they're just there waiting for the fraudster to just hack through them. The rate at which this can be done is phenomenal. I mean, within an hour, you can have had everything exposed before you've even realized there's a problem, before you realize that your phone has been hacked, that your SIM has been swapped out. And then someone has gained access to all of your lucrative accounts. In this case, this particular guy, this Michael, he had lots of cryptocurrency, which was then sold in Bitcoin for something like the equivalent of 1,500 Bitcoin, which equated at the time to around 24 million US dollars. And it was, very simple hack. He already thought he'd done the protection. He'd done as much as he thought he could, but now it just makes people think that two-form authentication is something that I think we're trying to push people away from using SIM card for, just because of this vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly. And we were actually reading some articles about research done in this topic. And just like Simon mentioned, there are cases whereby you have some degree of complicity where the person working at a mobile phone provider, network provider, would be either bribed or coerced in a certain way. We've read about reports for as little as $100 to convince someone to issue a new SIM or to port the SIM to a new number to get access to an account, which can be worth a lot more, as we can see here. And on that note, to the point of using SMS as a second factor, we've already seen some movements in the regulations in the market, specifically with PSD2 and the FIDO Alliance, both advising against the use of SMS as the only second factor authentication. Naturally, there are others which we can leverage as well, so to keep yourself secure, add as many layers as you can.
But I think I'd also heard recently that GSMA, they are advising, they're now looking at the ability to sort of flag up occasions where someone is accessing 2FA within a certain time period of when the number has been ported or the SIM has been switched over. Now, that's good at the moment because it's relatively new, but it's only going to be a matter of time. As we're all aware, fraudsters move very, very quickly. As soon as something becomes public knowledge, the fraudsters are already trying to deal with this. So it's only going to become a matter of time till the system is flagged up as if you can hack the account within this amount of time, then you're home free. The alerts don't flag up. So it's going to be very, very difficult to prevent this if we stick with just that one form of identification, verification by telephone.
Right, and that segues us into our next prediction.
Yeah, well, cash incentives. These are going to continue to be a strong attractor for fraudsters. Whenever a particular company runs some form of drive or promotion, if you click onto the next slide, so we can see here it's going to draw in a lot of business. You're going to increase the business, you're going to have higher volumes, but at the same time, this incentive that you're using to bring in new business, this way you're driving people towards your services, is also very, very attractive to the fraudster. If you're running a promotion for new joiners or for opening accounts, if there's any kind of bonus or free money or something like that, something that could be monetized, then certainly you're going to get a load of people who are going to try to open up multiple accounts as quickly as they can, or false accounts or extra accounts. We see this quite a lot with some of our clients as well. You see a spike in their volume, you then see a spike obviously in the fraud, and it goes up almost disproportionately. The more volume you have, you get a higher volume of fraud than usual. It's not the same percentage, it's gone up in a much greater amount. Referral bonuses as well, these can be a bit of a driver. But also we kind of seen a link between this and fluctuations in certain currencies as well. I think if we click onto the next slide maybe, or
yeah, so in this slide what we've done is we've plotted what we've perceived at Onfido as the number of attacks using compromised documents versus the massive spike of Bitcoin towards the end of 2017. And this shows this graph only shows the unique new attacks that are happening, and as we can see, the new attacks are very well trailing with the price of Bitcoin. So we can assume that once we see certain economic drivers that are changing the volatility of the market, we'll see fraudsters try and leverage that. And this is both with crypto as well as fiat currencies, where we've seen countries which are going through economic instability and some form of political strife where the currencies devalued, that those people in those geographies will tend to move their assets from one currency to another. Now, not only does this attract the people to defend their assets, to protect their assets, but also fraudsters want to defraud systems as and when possible.
Yeah, exactly, you go with the traffic.
Exactly. So this is a very interesting case because many times when we have customers running a form of marketing campaign, they will focus on acquiring new customers as opposed to protecting them. And just a 1% increase in fraud that you miss can actually end up causing a loss on the entire marketing campaign because you end up losing more on the fraud than you gain in the acquisition of new customers. And we've seen some customers that have actually been hit very strongly by that.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, I mean, from our point of view, we are, as we said, we're very aware of the spikes. We notice, particularly in our team, there's a massive increase in fraud around these particular points. Yeah, it's definitely something, it's an alert for us. It's something, we try and inform our clients about to make them aware of it. It's always better if you communicate with your service provider that something like this is coming so that we can always ramp up for it. If we're aware of it, we can defend better against it. It's just simple logic.
Exactly. This brings us on to our next prediction with regards to what's going to happen with documents. Now, with the security industry for documents, it's quite a crowded space. There are many different providers creating different types of inks and creating different types of substrates, polycarbonate, paper, cotton-based, and so on and so forward.
Lots of like manufacturers, also lots of providers of the individual security features that would go into a document. So lots of holographic manufacturers, loads of holographic manufacturers. It's like every exhibition you go to, there's about 20 stands of holographic laminates or holographic patches. And then obviously there's a big drive, or there has been in the last decade or so, towards getting everybody with their biometric identity. So in putting the chips into the card, where's the chip going to go? How are we moving forward with what we can do with the biometric chip? So everyone talks about the EID in regard to the RFID chip or the contact chip that you might find on a document, what information you're going to put onto there, and all of this kind of information. But in the market that we're living in now, the way that things are moving, society is moving quicker than maybe, let's say, border control and the traditional methods of ID management, where that's been based very much in the physical world. We're already starting to see certain governments and certain government agencies moving towards a more cost-effective or just generally less economically strenuous idea of providing something that someone can have at home, that they can access easily over the internet, or basically that means that they don't have to considerably fork out on printing processes or something like that. So the idea of getting something printed at home appeals to countries that have got a very high population, but maybe not one of the stronger economies. But then obviously this digital identity is something that's not only attractive in those type of countries, but we're seeing it start to take off bit by bit, maybe as projects or maybe as short-term solutions in other countries as well, across maybe Europe, for example. I think by the end of 2020, there are going to be certain states in the US that are moving very much towards having a digital driving license instead of a physical one.
Yeah, so the two trends that we're seeing, as Simon mentioned, echo exactly that. The speed at which governments generally tend to come up with new developments and propose new ways of solving the older problems. As Simon highlighted, the problems would be the cost of starting a new document production line and the security behind it. So one way to get around the cost of printing and making these documents is to record all of your populational information in a database and then issue people with a token that they can print at home that has a QR code or a specific code that then allows the person verifying it to search for that person's entry in a database. On the complete opposite spectrum, we've seen some nations actually leapfrogging and jumping over the print at home stage and going straight to mobile. Where they have, as Simon mentioned, certain states in the US in active pilots, as well as certain countries across Europe that are already have already rolled out a digital form of identity stored on a mobile device.
Yeah, but I think what it boils down to is it's trying to find that balance between user convenience, but at the same time having the necessary friction that robust security affords you. You see a massive driver to try and make it easier for people to gain access to their identity documents. And as I say, in countries where you don't necessarily have a strong an infrastructure, or maybe it's just not your population is too high, it is a real headache. You hear nightmare tales from some countries where people are queuing for hours, for an entire day, just to try and get to the front of the queue, and then the driving license agency, for example, is closed. In those cases, it's a much more attractive idea if you just set up servers, let people help themselves. But at the same time, you're kind of losing something through doing that, really. So the different ways that we've got the traditional way, obviously.
Yeah, and with traditional documents, this is something that most of us will have or hold. These would be issued, generally speaking, from a centralized location which is secured, and they will have rigorous quality assurance processes to make sure that the documents look and feel genuine and there are no errors which would cause anyone to reject those documents. They're constructed in a very durable way. Most of us have to hold on to our documents for at least 5 years, so they will be made to withstand the elements, and they're usually also secured at the point of issue, in the sense of the procedures required to issue those documents. For example, in the US, we have the Real ID Act, which requires users to submit more information than normal for an Real ID compliant driving license. Now, what that does is it ensures that the document that has been issued to those higher compliance standards has a higher reliability, because the information behind the document has been verified to a higher degree of scrutiny.
Yeah, and you've had many countries where maybe they've had the money, or they've had a significant kind of donation from another country or another organisation that's quite well off, and has the economy and has the funds available to help. So their document has become more robust, and then you find that the document is still compromised because of maybe the less stringent issuing procedures. So over the last sort of couple of decades, you've really seen a lot of countries upping their game in regards to how they're issuing documents, what is necessary to receive that document, how many hoops you have to jump through, what kind of identification you have to provide. And while all that has been tightened up, it's still not perfect. It's getting there, but at the same time, we're now sort of saying, well, we've got traditional identity, these are all the hoops you have to jump through, and now we're saying, well, actually, we want to make it even more convenient for people. So we're kind of stripping that back a bit, and that's where we're looking at sort of things like the idea of accessing it. I can apply online, I only have to do a few things to verify who I am, and then when you've got these printout at home ones, I mean, certainly from our point of view, they're the least ideal scenario. You've lost out on all of the stringent construction techniques, or the high quality that you have to go through, or the exclusivity that you get from something that's been securely manufactured and securely printed, something that's normally, you know, from a monetary point of view, really difficult to reproduce to the same standard. And now we're saying, no, it's okay, you can reproduce it at home with your desktop printer. Well, we've just immediately wiped out one of the massive bonuses of having a secure document in the traditional sense. So we're not gaining anything by doing this, apart from just giving people ease of access. But with that, we are allowing people much greater ease to forge or counterfeit these documents. And we're just essentially making these documents far more vulnerable.
Yeah, and we have to think about the usability of these types of documents. So here on our screen we have an example of the Indian Aadhaar card, which is essentially a receipt for an entry in a government database. Now, if I'm a business owner in India and I'm running doing something that is financially regulated, usually I'll have access to the government database, so I can look up that person's information and confirm that it's correct. But as soon as you leave the home country, that entire database infrastructure becomes pretty much useless, because to my knowledge, most countries don't share access to their populational databases.
Exactly. You lose that accessibility. Now you can't verify the identity just from a QR card, because you're not, a QR code, because you're not necessarily the right organization to verify it in that way. You haven't got the access, you haven't got the permission, or you can't decrypt what's in there, or at least well, you would hope not anyway. Yeah. But yeah, it's suddenly all of the whole point. You've centered your document, your online document that you've allowed people to print off. Your main focus on there is the fact you have a QR code that verifies you on a database that the rest of the world are never going to be able to gain access to.
Exactly, and this India is far from the only country where this has happened. We've seen this across a few different places, and this seems to be one of the diverging trends, where the developing nations go for the cost-effective database solution.
Yeah, again, it's coming back to economy versus population, ease
Exactly.
of access.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, we have other nations which are slightly better developed and have a more, let's say, disposable income for this type of problems,
Yeah.
and we get into a completely different outlook. Now, here's an example of an app that's been rolled out by the Norwegian government,
Oh, yeah.
whereby you can have your driving license on your mobile phone. And I've actually seen a demo. It's interactive, so it has some form of holographic element or emulation of a holographic element on your phone, so that when you twist it, it looks like it's actually a hologram on the phone.
So presumably you need to have a phone that's of the right level of sophistication.
Yeah, that is one of the entry barriers.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it means you have to be a bit more affluent, or it's not going to sell well to one of these more developing nations that we talked about with the previous solution.
Exactly, but even this solution, as amazing as it is, has its own vulnerability, so to speak. For example, when this Norway mobile phone driving license app came out, on the day it came out, the server crashed because too many people were trying to access it at the same time. So while it's amazing in theory, in practice, to have a very high level of assurance, you would need internet access, which is an accessibility question. Does your entire population have access to high-speed internet?
Exactly.
So are the servers constantly working?
What if you're in a Wi-Fi black spot?
Exactly.
Something like this.
Exactly. So then that might mean that you have this fantastic solution, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Also, let's not forget about how many of us run out of power on our phones.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as soon as your battery's dead, you become persona non grata and you can't use that anymore.
Exactly.
But some of the benefits could be in the specifically in the privacy region, where if you're buying age-restricted products, alcohol or tobacco, there's no need for the teller to know your address. Or your exact date of birth.
Exactly. Yeah.
They only need to know that you're over a certain limit of
They
an
don't
age.
need any more of your personal information than just the fact you are legally able to purchase whatever this item is, alcohol or cigarettes or whatever.
So for those of us that are privacy conscious, that might sound like a fantastic solution, with all of the caveats that it's still a developing technology and it's still something that we're yet to see wide adoption of. So far in Europe, we have Norway, we have Bosnia and Herzegovina going out with a pilot for the electronic driving licenses. I've heard about Austria doing a trial for their electronic driving licenses. Iowa, as the state of Iowa in the US, and a few others as well are experimenting with this, but it's really hard to say how quickly the adoption is going to reach, let's say, terminal velocity, and everyone's going to go down this route.
Yeah, and again, I think sort of it's one of these things where maybe the people that are implementing it are only thinking of it maybe one-dimensionally. So they're thinking of a driving license. What do I need a driving license for? I need it to verify that you're allowed to drive. I might need it to verify your age. But they're not thinking that at the same time, this purely digital version of it, who else is going to need access to this? So, for example, I want to open up a bank account. Can I use my digital driving license to open a bank account? Well, that means that the private company needs to be able to access this information as well. So what facilities have they made open to these other service providers in gaining access to the things that are going to verify this digital identity as being authentic? We no longer have the document in front of us. We don't have all of the things that everyone has learned how to do so far, and spent a long time learning about security features or how to verify these things with various desktop readers and whatnot. We've now just got purely a digital document that's never existed in the physical sense, so it doesn't have any of these items that we can verify. So there has to be some kind of portal or something. Has that been set up? How much infrastructure has been put in place? How much money has been invested in that side of the digital identity? Is it purely just for its primary purpose, or have they actually thought a bit more about the wider implications?
Yeah, and from speaking with governments, usually the different functions of a government are in silo of each other. So someone that works for the, let's say, the driving authority or equivalent in a country will not consider the implications for tax, as an example.
Exactly, yeah.
And they will not consider the implication for, let's say, passport renewals. And that is something that comes out of maturity of a country's infrastructure. And we've seen this in, for example, Estonia, that's leapfrogged, and they've turned all of the services digital, or the vast majority of them, and with the one document, the Estonian ID card, for example, you can go online and you can do everything, from renewing your driving license, to renewing your passport, to submitting your tax returns, and so on and so forth. So it works well if you consider all the potential use cases. But even if you have considered all of the use cases, for example, in the UK, we have outlines that prevent government databases from communicating to each other, and that's to assure security, so that one of your databases gets hacked, it limits the impact of that.
Which is kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier with data breaches.
So there's this is an interesting development, and we've heard a lot about it in the security industry, about the different approaches to this. And there's even another trend which we've seen with the manufacturers of security features, where now they're coming up with new mechanical techniques of putting things onto physical documents that can be authenticated with a smartphone. Now, that is an amazing thing. It would be great if your smartphone had a QR code, and you could, for example, or some other element that's extremely hard to counterfeit.
And like you can tag replacements, that kind of thing.
It would be amazing if you had that and you can authenticate it with a phone. But then the security industry is largely private. So if I'm a manufacturer of a secure ink, for example, I don't want other manufacturers to be able to authenticate my documents. So then that creates 25 million different security elements, which all require their own specific app to validate one document out of 5,000 which are in circulation. And this quickly reaches the point of no longer being usable, because
there's just too many variables, too many different items that you need. I mean, I think that's a very valid point as well. Everyone around the industry is still trying to make sure that they're making profit, that they're making money. There's lots of vested interest in how these solutions go. No one. It's going to be very difficult to get people to become totally altruistic about their approach to this, but it kind of needs that overarching theory and kind of oversight to make sure that everything is all going to fit with each other in a way that's going to be practical, is going to be robust, secure, and is going to work for everybody. It does present a lot of challenges. I think one of the things that we've kind of talked about, certainly is something that I think we're looking at here as a company, is the idea of just a digital identity in and of itself. Something that you can, or like we said here, you've got the idea of just maybe one-time registration with, with one provider or one system, and once you're registered on that, then that is able to be accessed by other different services, and in that way you've got that one source of truth that every party can interact with in a safe way. It protects your identity, but then at the same time you're still being granted the access that you need. But yeah, it's how governments move towards it. It needs a lot of buy-in. It's a difficult one to master.
Yeah, and one other thing to keep in mind is this is a very long cycle. The speed at which a government will change their document infrastructure, or even change the design of a given document with the same infrastructure, is very slow. Normally, we now, for example, are looking into the security elements and the design which will be on the documents 5 years from now, because it has to be designed first, it has to be approved by all the government agencies, which will take a long time.
Process in the first instance before you go into the design process, and it's a very long process. I mean, if it can be brought down to 5 years, then that's, I think that's probably one of the most streamlined versions you're going to see of it. But it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah. So to keep in mind that the identity documents that you currently own were designed roughly 5 or 10 years ago. So it makes sense that they're already out of date by the time that they come out, because society is moving so quickly these days. And with society moving quickly, there are also new challenges that these documents were never designed to solve in the beginning. And that actually segues us into deep fakes.
Yeah, deep fakes. This is definitely something that's come about more recently. It's quite an interesting topic. It's well, deep fakes are where we're talking about kind of digital impersonation, really. Taking an image or a video of someone and then altering it to sort of I can assume someone else's identity with some kind of maybe visual verification, like a video or something like that. I think, have we got?
Yeah, I think we should have a quick little
demonstration in here.
Yeah.
Unable to play. Okay, so maybe we won't do that.
Maybe we won't do the demo.
We won't do the demo.
I'm sure that most of you will have seen examples of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been
there was a. There we go. There we go. This one seems to be working. Some of you
is saying anything at any point
may have seen versions of this.
Even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right. Or Ben Carson is in the sunken place. Or, how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit.
Okay.
Now, you see, I would never say these things.
I think it's exactly that. I mean, there's been a project recently. I think it was we were talking about this earlier. What was the research group?
Yes, it was a research group working out of MIT together with KU Leuven, some of the better universities looking at machine learning out there right now, and they've come up with a model that can transpose body movement and face movement
from a still image
onto any still image. So from a given model, let's say I get up and I start doing some jumping jacks, and I'm recorded while doing that. I transpose that into a statue of the David, for example, and I can make a statue dance in a video by using just one still image of a statue and a video of me performing the action that the statue is meant to be doing. And we've seen pictures of Mona Lisa, or actually videos of Mona Lisa speaking. We've seen
laughing, putting different facial impressions literally coming to life just based on a donor video of someone else making those facial movements and then it being transposed onto the still image.
So this becomes a challenge because in many different scenarios, you can have multi-layer authentication. We can have a database search, and as we mentioned earlier,
we've talked about already.
They may not be the most robust, especially considering the geography that you're operating in. You can have documents which are then generated with these fake details, and to avoid that, you can have an additional layer of biometric verification. But if you're only going for a still image, then you will miss out on the potential of the person being impersonated. So
well, I think we've recently been talking as well about how Adobe I think they're just about to release a new software solution that is designed to help spot if a selfie, for example, has been modified or similar, if something's been changed in it by looking at sort of pixel textures, that kind of thing. And this is not particularly new. The idea has been around for a little while. We've used and seen other solutions as well. But the idea of it moving into video, in fact, people are now attacking videos, which I would have thought up until fairly recent were thought to be quite robust or quite a good way of verifying it. It's certainly something that I think is being brought into legislation or into the criteria that certain governments or certain financial bodies are looking at as part of their verification process. We must prove liveness of the person, maybe liveness of the document. So it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent and something that we really have to be aware of.
So one way to defend against this is by doing a facial similarity. You compare the image of the holder of the document with the actual image on the document, and that will give you a score. Now, interestingly, we have an anecdote about this with how computers are really good at doing certain things and they're really bad at doing other things. And up until now, you would have thought, well, surely a human is better at picking out faces than a computer. But what we've seen is, unless you have what's called a super recognizer, which are 0.5% of the population that can recognize faces better than anyone else, computers actually do a better job at facial matching. Now, there's a small asterisk here with regards to the data sets for this and with regards to racially biased algorithms that we've all heard about. which many people are now trying to address. Obviously, that is a known limitation, but for the most part, computers are better at doing this type of tasks than humans, and they do it faster.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's, you know, the slight flaws that they've got at the moment, it's just a case of tidying these things up and improving on the algorithm, but the principle of it is there, and the statistics kind of do bear it out as a more successful means of verification. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so when you go through the facial verification or the facial matching, there are different types of spoofing or presentation attacks that you can see. So you could have photos of a photo or photo of a screen. Like Simon mentioned earlier, everyone puts their LinkedIn photo online, and usually the LinkedIn photos are really nice and centered. They look very much like a passport picture, or should.
Or that lovely three-quarter shot as well, just so someone can catch your ear.
Yeah, exactly.
The fingerprint of the face.
Yeah, so if you take a picture of a screen or a photo of a given photo, you can use that as an impersonation technique, which is low complexity. You then have medium complexity with 2D masks and eyes cut out, and all sorts of stuff like that, makeup, glasses, whatever you want. And then at the far end of the spectrum are 3D masks and deepfakes, which we were just talking about. However, from our point of view, we're protecting against these pretty well. The reason,
I think part of that is by driving people through something like an SDK rather than allowing them to do it through a portal where there's more ways that you can hack into it. An SDK kind of locks that down a lot more. It gives you a lot more security with that conversation that you're having with the end user. So it's harder for them to you know, input something via a spoof or something like that. It certainly protects to a certain extent.
Yeah, and here we have some examples of essentially how our algorithm would perform against different types of attacks. And at the very top line, we can see a genuine selfie and what is a computer-generated visual heat map that tells us how likely it is that the image is a spoof.
Or an actual person.
Yeah, or an actual person. And then if you take a picture of a picture, then that will look completely differently. So a computer will pick up that kind of stuff better than a human would. And then another example of this would be a picture of a phone or
a
any
monitor or tablet or whatever.
Or any other type of device that you might want to use. And again, what we can do here is look at the texture-based analysis and understand that this is not an actual person. The light doesn't reflect the right way. The composite colors don't seem about right. So it's a completely different element.
Yeah, or we get the frequency of the pixels creating some of a moire effect. So it's you know, it's something that should easily be visually verifiable and something that software should be able to pick up.
Yeah, and then if we move ahead on this, we can look at medium complexity, so things like masks and such, whereby here we have a demo of our live algorithm showing a head tilt detection, where most of the masks and the 3D renders that we've seen aren't 3D or aren't available to be 3D at a cheap enough price to make it profitable for fraudsters. So what we've done there is we've used that kind of information from the market to come up with a solution that is on one side accessible to a user, so they don't have to do something that's extremely complicated, but at the same time allows them to have a higher degree of assurance when performing these types or in accepting these types of users onto your platform.
Yeah, and I think changing the challenge each time as well is a really good move as well, because then it's not just a case of learning what the challenge is for a specific onboarding approach. You know, if it's always going to be turn left, then you just build your model so it always turns left. Have random challenges that change from time to time, or a varying script, then that again builds in that variability that's going to make it less cost effective and more expensive for your fraudster to try and sort of attack that particular process.
Yeah. So then we go into the high complexity facial morphs or facial attacks, where, like as we said, most techniques struggle with a 3D face, and they only have a partial 3D or 2.5D, so to speak. Yeah. So this keeps the bar higher for fraudsters to get right. And as Simon mentioned, the SDK is a really good thing to protect against sometimes called injection attacks.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, you don't want anyone hijacking your chain of custody. You want to know that what the user submits is a true representation of what's in front of the mobile phone or the screen that you're using.
Exactly. You don't want them just uploading a file that they've pre-prepared, because that just
defeats the purpose.
exactly. Just leaves the door wide open.
Yeah. So what we want to do is make sure that you put enough safeguards to protect your users. And fraud is always a game of displacement.
Yeah.
There's actually a famous quote: "You don't need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun the smallest member of the pack."
Yeah.
Because fraudsters are, let's say, mindful of the ROI, and they will attack the solutions that have the least amount of defenses.
Exactly.
So you don't need to have the most secure and most robust technique. It just has to be better than your competitors. And then the fraudsters will target your competitors or whoever is the weakest link in the system. And this brings us back to the SIM challenge earlier, where the SIM is the weakest link in the system.
In the chain, exactly. But this is it. It's not that your fraudsters particularly, I mean, they'll be motivated, but at the same time, they're going to go for the lowest hanging fruit. It's just common sense. You've got a certain amount of time. You need to make maximum return on that amount of time. So you go for the easiest targets. It's just like Mother Nature, like you said.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we are pretty much done, and we'll have a look at some of the questions if there have been any during the webinar.
Oh.
All right. Right, so
if we have the photo of a user's passport, can we compare that with other ID offline from your database, as the user may not have access to a smartphone or a PC camera?
Okay, I think this question is around offline verification, whereby you're using a reference, or what you're suggesting is using a reference to compare picture A to picture B. From our point of view, that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it's far less than ideal. It's kind of it just well, the last few topics we talk about, we've just completely circumvented them.
Yeah.
Effectively, if you're not able to verify someone by a guaranteed online connection, then it's very difficult to prove that you are actually dealing with the real individual. I could submit a photo of anybody's passport, and if you're then assuming, based on that, I'll check their other IDs and it looks like the same person and all these other IDs, and the document looks like it's genuine and there are no signs of fraud in the document, that's all well and good, but that doesn't confirm that me, the person uploading this particular application, is the genuine holder of that document. So it's certainly far from ideal in the sense of trying to maintain some integrity in the way you're bringing people on board.
And it circumvents the entire liveness part. Whereby you want to make sure that the person is alive, or so to speak, is the real person, the real holder of the document. So when you allow users,
this comes back to the data breaches where we're talking about, where we've seen cases of people's documents having been stolen via a data breach. They had it uploaded into a particular database, and someone had hacked that. They'd got their passport, they'd got their driving license with their address on it, all of their biometric details, and then they'd simply got another photo of them from an account they had online. And this is a real life scenario that we'd seen. We were looking at some of the documents genuine. The document's definitely genuine. Let's just run a quick search on the selfie. And sure enough, the selfie turns up. There it is on Google. It's already been hacked. It's already compromised. It's a very real problem. If you're unable to verify people as the actual holder in that way, if you're letting them upload stored images, it certainly makes you a lot more vulnerable to these particular attack vectors. It's a risky game.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening this afternoon. As ever, always good to have a chat, Dimi.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you all to all the people that joined the webinar. This has been very interesting for us. I think we're a bit maybe sometimes too close to the problem, but I think that also helps us look at the more in-depth things and the more specific elements that maybe not all of you want to bother themselves with.
It's all about the details in our line of work, let's be honest.
Yes, it is.
But
All
yeah,
right.
once again, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you all and have a lovely day.